The sun beat down on the arid plains of Arizona, a relentless furnace that baked the earth and shimmered in the distance. Eleanor Vance, her heart heavy but resolute, stood at the edge of the family's sprawling ranch. The air was thick with the scent of dust and sagebrush, a smell that had once meant home, but now carried the bitter tang of deceit. Her brothers, Silas and Jebediah, stood a few paces away, their faces impassive, masks of feigned concern that couldn't quite hide the avarice glinting in their eyes. "Are you certain about this, Ellie?" Silas drawled, his voice a low rumble, laced with a false tenderness. "The journey to the new territories is long and perilous." Eleanor clutched the worn leather satchel at her side, a gift from her late father. "I am. Father's dying wish was for me to see the world, not to be chained to this land, waiting for it to crumble around us." It was a half-truth. Her father had indeed spoken of broader horizons, but his true wish, whispered in his final days, was for his children to remain united. A wish Silas and Jebediah had clearly disregarded. Jebediah, a man of fewer words but more volatile temper, spat on the ground. "The world ain't for delicate flowers like you, sister. Best stay put where we can keep an eye on you." A chill snaked down Eleanor's spine, unrelated to the searing heat. Their words, their veiled threats, were a constant hum beneath the surface of their interactions since their father's passing 3 months ago. Their obsession with the ranch, with the meager fortune their father had amassed, had become a sickness. She knew with a certainty that settled like a stone in her gut that they saw her as an obstacle. "I'm not afraid," Eleanor stated, her voice gaining strength. "I've learned enough from Father to manage my own affairs." Silas offered a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Of course you have, Ellie. That's why we've prepared a little farewell gift, a safe place for you to rest before your journey." He gestured towards a newly dug pit near the old well, a dark, gaping maw in the earth. Confusion warred with dawning horror. What is that?" Jebediah stepped forward, his eyes hard as flint. "A place for you to finally be out of the way, Ellie. A place where you won't be bothering us no more." Before Eleanor could scream, before she could even comprehend the monstrous reality of their plan, Silas and Jebediah grabbed her. Her struggles were futile against their brute strength. She clawed, she kicked, she cried out, but her pleas were swallowed by the vast, indifferent sky. They shoved her into the pit. The fall was jarring, the impact knocking the wind from her lungs. Darkness, absolute suffocating darkness. She heard them above, their voices distorted by the earth, their cruel laughter echoing as they began to shovel dirt onto her. Each thud of soil was a hammer blow to her heart. She felt the weight pressing down, burying her alive, crushing her hopes, her dreams, her very existence. Panic seized her, a cold, desperate wave. She thrashed, trying to push away the suffocating earth, but it was useless. The air grew thin, heavy. Her vision, already blurring from the impact, began to fade, not just in her mind, but in reality. A searing pain shot through her eyes, as if doused in acid. She screamed a ragged, broken sound, but only the dirt heard. Then, nothing. Oblivion claimed her, a merciful descent into unconsciousness as her brothers sealed her fate, burying her not just in the earth, but in a darkness that would consume her very sight. They left her for dead, a forgotten secret beneath the unforgiving soil of the Arizona territory. Eleanor awoke to a world of exquisite silence, broken only by the frantic thumping of her own heart. The darkness that had consumed her was no longer a physical void, but a permanent state. She tried to open her eyes to see anything, but met only an unyielding blackness. The searing pain had subsided, replaced by a dull, throbbing ache and a chilling realization she was blind, utterly, irrevocably blind. Panic, a primal beast, threatened to engulf her. She was trapped, buried, and she couldn't see. She called out, her voice a hoarse whisper, a thread of sound lost in the vast emptiness. "Hello? Is anyone there?" Only the silence answered. days blurred into a timeless agony. She subsisted on the meager remains of her strength, her mind a tempest of fear and despair. She crawled, she stumbled, she clawed at the dirt, a desperate, instinctive search for an escape that seemed impossible. The earth was her tomb. Then a sound, a faint rhythmic scraping. Hope, a fragile ember, flickered within her. She strained her ears, trying to discern its origin. It grew louder, closer. It was the sound of a pickaxe digging into the earth. "Help!" she croaked, summoning every ounce of her remaining energy. "Please help me!" The digging stopped, a moment of terrifying silence. Then a gruff voice, filled with surprise, echoed from above. "Well, I'll be... What in tarnation is this?" A shovel scraped against the wooden planks of a makeshift coffin. The earth was being moved. Light, faint and alien, pierced the darkness, not visually, but as a lessening of pressure, a whisper of the open air. Then rough hands grabbed her, pulling her from the earthen tomb. She gasped, choking on the fresh, clean air, her blinded eyes squinting against a light she couldn't perceive. A man loomed over her, his silhouette a dark shape against the blindingly bright sky. He was weathered, his face etched with the harsh lines of a life lived under the sun. "Who in God's name are you?" he asked, his voice a mixture of gruffness and bewilderment. Eleanor, weak and disoriented, could only sob. They buried me. My brothers." The man's eyes, sharp and assessing, took in her disheveled state, the dirt caked on her skin, the vacant, unseeing stare of her eyes. He saw the pit, the hastily covered timbers. "Buried you. Alive." He knelt, his movements surprisingly gentle. "The Lord be praised. You're alive. But your eyes—" He introduced himself as Jedediah Stone, a prospector and trapper, a man who preferred the solitude of the wilderness to the company of men. He'd been tracking a rare beaver herd near Eleanor's family ranch when he'd heard her faint cries. He'd seen the fresh earth, the disturbed ground, and his curiosity, coupled with a sense of unease, had led him to investigate. Jedediah, though rough around the edges, possessed a kind heart. He saw the absolute devastation in Eleanor's situation, the cruelty of her abandonment. He couldn't leave her to die. He carefully helped her to her feet, his strong hands a steadying presence. "Come on, girl," he said, his voice softening. "You ain't safe here, not with those varmints still breathing." As he led her away from the scene of her near death, Eleanor clung to his arm. The world was gone, replaced by an unending night. But in the darkness, a new ember began to glow, the ember of survival. And within that survival, a different kind of fire was kindled, the cold, hard flame of vengeance. Her brothers had taken her sight, but they had not taken her life. And for that, they would pay. Jedediah Stone's claim was a modest cabin, nestled precariously on a high mesa overlooking a vast, rugged canyon. It was a stark contrast to the sprawling elegance of the Vance ranch, but to Eleanor it offered a sanctuary. Jedediah, a man of few words but immense practicality, provided for her needs with a quiet competence. He brought her water, cleaned her wounds, and fashioned a sturdy walking stick for her. He never pried, sensing the deep well of pain and anger that lay beneath her fragile exterior. Eleanor, in turn, began to adapt to her new reality. The initial terror of the darkness gradually gave way to a fierce determination. She trained her other senses, her hearing becoming exquisitely sharp, her sense of touch more nuanced. The rustle of leaves, the distant cry of a hawk, the subtle shifts in Jedediah's footsteps. Each sound was a piece of information, a way to navigate her world. She learned to recognize Jedediah's gait, the scent of his campfire smoke, the comforting weight of his hand when he guided her. "You're a strong one, Eleanor," Jedediah remarked one evening as they sat by the fire. The flames cast dancing shadows, a spectacle she could only imagine through the crackling sounds and the warmth on her face. "Most would have given up after what you've been through." Eleanor's lips curved into a faint smile. "Giving up means letting them win, Jedediah. "And I have no intention of doing that." The words were a quiet vow, a promise to herself. She began to ask Jedediah questions, not about the world she could no longer see, but about the world she now had to understand through other means. She learned about the trails, the towns, the people who inhabited this harsh land. She absorbed details about the local sheriff, Sheriff Brody, a man Jedediah described as fair, but with a blind spot for family loyalty. She learned about the distances, the types of horses, the routes her brothers might take to avoid detection. Her blindness, initially a devastating weakness, was slowly transforming. She discovered she could still see in a way, through the information Jedediah provided and through the keenness of her other senses. She could discern the subtle inflections in his voice, the hesitations that spoke of unspoken thoughts. She began to recognize the nuances of the wind, understanding how it carried sounds and scents, how it could be a messenger of approaching weather or unseen travelers. One day, while Jedediah was out hunting, Eleanor sat by the open doorway of the cabin. The wind, a constant companion, whispered through the canyon. She heard the distant jingle of spurs, the rhythmic clip-clop of a horse. It was a sound she knew well, a sound that always sent a prickle of unease down her spine. The horse grew closer, its rider dismounting near the cabin. A gruff voice called out, "Hello in there! Anyone home?" Eleanor's heart leaped into her throat. It was Silas. He had found her. A cold dread washed over her, quickly followed by a surge of adrenaline. She was alone, blind and defenseless, but then another feeling rose, a steely resolve that had been hardening within her since her burial. She stood, gripping her walking stick. "Who's there?" she called back, her voice surprisingly steady, though her hands trembled. "It's Silas, Ellie, your brother." The voice was feigned concern, the same false tenderness she remembered. "We've been worried sick about you. Jedediah said you went off on your own." Eleanor's mind raced. This was an opportunity, a dangerous one, but an opportunity nonetheless. Jedediah had warned her that her brothers would likely try to silence her, to ensure she couldn't tell anyone what they had done. "Silas," she said, her voice carefully modulated, I can't see. I don't know where I am. I need help." She played the victim, the helpless sister they had presumed dead. She heard him approach, his footsteps heavy on the rocky ground. She could smell the cheap tobacco he favored, the sweat of a man accustomed to rough living. "Oh, Ellie," he murmured, his voice sickeningly sweet. She felt his presence just before she heard his hand reach out. Suddenly the cabin door creaked open and Jedediah stepped out. "Hold it right there, stranger," he said, his voice a low growl. He held his rifle at the ready. "What business do you have with my guest?" Silas recoiled, his false concern vanishing, replaced by a flash of anger and surprise. "Who the hell are you, and who is this woman?" "She's Eleanor Vance," Jedediah stated, his gaze steady, "and she's under my protection. Now you can turn that horse around and ride back the way you came, or we'll have a more serious conversation." Silas, realizing he was outmatched and his plan foiled, spat on the ground. "This ain't over, Vance," he snarled, before mounting his horse and riding away, the sound of his retreating hoofbeats a hollow echo in the vastness. Eleanor, her body rigid with tension, sagged against the cabin wall. She had survived another encounter thanks to Jedediah, but the encounter had solidified her resolve. They would not stop until she was truly silenced, and she would not rest until they paid for what they had done. The wind, as it swirled around the mesa, seemed to carry her silent promise of vengeance. The encounter with Silas had shaken Eleanor, but it had also fanned the embers of her anger into a consuming flame. She knew her brothers wouldn't give up easily. They feared what she might know, what she might say. Jedediah, sensing her renewed determination, offered his reluctant support. "They'll be back, Eleanor," he said, his voice grim. "And next time they won't be alone. Silas is a snake, but Jedediah's got a viper's venom." "Then we must be ready," Eleanor replied, her voice unwavering. I need to know more about them, Jedediah, about their movements, their plans. I need to know how to get to them. Jedediah, a man who usually shied away from entanglements, found himself drawn into Eleanor's cause. Her quiet strength, her unwavering resolve in the face of such profound loss, had earned his respect. He also harbored a deep disdain for the Vance brothers, having witnessed their cruelty and greed firsthand during his dealings with their father. "There's a town a few days' ride from here," Jedediah began, sketching a rudimentary map in the dirt with a stick. "Harmony Creek. It's where they do most of their business, buy supplies, sell their cattle. Sheriff Brody's there. He's their cousin's husband, if memory serves. That's their real protection." Eleanor's brow furrowed. "So the law is in their pocket." "More or less," Jedediah conceded. "But Brody ain't entirely corrupt. He's just blind to their worst deeds, or chooses to be." Jedediah decided to make a trip to Harmony Creek under the guise of selling some pelts. He would gather information, observe, and perhaps find a way to sow seeds of discord or uncover evidence that could be used against Silas and Jebediah. Eleanor, though she protested, understood his need for discretion. She would remain at the cabin, honing her senses, preparing herself for the inevitable confrontation. Jedediah returned a week later, his face etched with grim news. "They're planning something big," he reported, his voice low. "Heard them talking in the saloon. They're expecting a large shipment of livestock, and they've hired some rough characters to protect it, folks known for their thoroughness." "Thoroughness?" Eleanor echoed, a shiver tracing her spine. "Means they'll kill anyone who gets in their way, Eleanor. And they're expecting trouble. They think someone might try to raid the shipment. They're laying a trap, but it ain't for rustlers." "For me," Eleanor whispered. The trap was for her. "They think you're dead, or at least lost and harmless," Jedediah clarified. "But Silas saw you. They know you're alive. They want to make sure you stay that way." Dead. The pieces clicked into place. Her brothers were not just trying to silence her. They were actively hunting her, using hired guns to do their dirty work. The weight of their treachery pressed down on her, a physical burden. "I can't let them do this," Eleanor said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and resolve. "I can't let them hurt anyone else, or get away with it." Jedediah looked at her, his gaze filled with a newfound respect. "You're talking about more than just revenge, Eleanor. You're talking about justice. Is there a difference?" she asked, her blind eyes fixed in his direction. "Sometimes," Jedediah replied slowly. "Sometimes vengeance is just a wound. Justice can heal." He explained that the shipment was due to arrive in 10 days at a remote staging post called Devil's Gulch. It was a notorious spot, a place where outlaws and honest folk alike passed through, a crossroads of desperation and opportunity. "They'll be there, Eleanor," Jedediah said. "And those hired guns, they're dangerous men. You can't go alone." Eleanor met his gaze, her sightless eyes finding his. "I have to. But perhaps I won't be entirely alone." She looked towards the direction of Harmony Creek, her mind already formulating a plan, a desperate gamble that relied on the very darkness that had been forced upon her. She would use her blindness, not as a weakness, but as a shield, a cloak, and eventually a weapon. The journey to Harmony Creek was a test of Eleanor's newfound resilience. With Jedediah's guidance, she navigated the rough terrain, her senses working overtime. She learned to distinguish the subtle changes in the earth beneath her feet, the faint scent of pine needles that marked the passage of a trail, the distant murmur of water that indicated a stream. Jedediah, ever watchful, ensured their passage was as discreet as possible, avoiding known settlements and keeping to the more remote paths. Harmony Creek was a dusty, bustling town, a hub of activity in the otherwise desolate territory. Jedediah described it to Eleanor as a place where fortune seekers and fortune thieves rubbed shoulders. Saloons, general stores, and a livery stable lined the main street, a cacophony of sounds that assailed Eleanor's heightened senses. Raucous laughter, the clatter of horseshoes, the insistent barking of dogs, and the low hum of countless conversations. Jedediah left Eleanor in a small rented room above the general store, instructing her to remain hidden and silent. He then ventured into the town, his mission to gather more intelligence on Silas and Jebediah's hired hands and to observe Sheriff Brody. For Eleanor, the enforced stillness was agonizing. She sat by the window, listening to the rhythm of the town, trying to decipher the stories carried on the wind. She heard the gruff voices of cowboys, the sharp, high-pitched laughter of saloon girls, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. Each sound painted a picture in her mind, a mosaic of the life she could no longer see. Jedediah returned late that night, his face grim. "Brody's at the saloon, playing cards with Silas and Jebediah," he reported. "They're feeling confident. The hired guns are camped just outside of town, waiting for the word to move to Devil's Gulch. They're a nasty bunch, Eleanor, led by a man named Kane. Heard he's got a reputation for being thorough, as I said, cold-blooded." Eleanor's hands clenched into fists. "And what about evidence, Jedediah? Is there any way to prove what they did?" Jedediah sighed, the sound heavy with frustration. "Brody's too close to them. Any evidence we find, he'll likely make it disappear. The only way to nail them is to catch them in the act, or to get them to confess. And that's a dangerous game, Eleanor." He then revealed a piece of information that sparked a dangerous idea in Eleanor's mind. "There's a former ranch hand, a young man named Billy. He was fired by your brothers a few months back. They said he was stealing, but I heard he just got in their way, saw too much. He's still around Harmony Creek, works odd jobs. He owes me a favor." A flicker of hope ignited within Eleanor, a disgruntled former employee, someone who might have witnessed something, or perhaps even been privy to their plans. "Can you find him?" Eleanor asked, her voice tight with anticipation. "Can you bring him here?" Jedediah nodded. "I can, but Eleanor, this is getting dangerous for all of us." "I know," she replied, her blind eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the dusty windowpane. "But I can't go back to being buried, Jedediah. Not anymore." Jedediah managed to locate Billy, a scared but loyal young man who harbored a deep resentment towards Silas and Jebediah. He had indeed been fired for trying to report their mistreatment of the ranch hands and their shady dealings. When Jedediah explained Eleanor's situation and her desire for justice, Billy readily agreed to help. He met Eleanor in the darkened room, his initial apprehension quickly giving way to shock and then a quiet determination. He described Silas and Jebediah's crude attempts to spread rumors about Eleanor's supposed madness after her father's death, and how they had used her temporary disappearance as confirmation. He also revealed that their greedy brothers' act was a carefully constructed facade. They were deep in debt and saw Eleanor's inheritance as their only salvation. "They didn't just bury you, Mom," Billy stammered, his voice thick with shame. "They pawned off some of your father's personal belongings already to a fence in Abilene, said no one would miss 'em and no one would ever find you." The revelation of their further betrayal, their callous disregard for her father's memory, sent a fresh wave of cold fury through Eleanor. It wasn't just about her life or her sight. It was about their desecration of her father's legacy. As Billy spoke, Eleanor pieced together a daring plan. "Billy," she interrupted, her voice gaining a newfound authority, "I need you to do something for me. I need you to go back to the saloon tonight. Listen to everything Silas and Jebediah say. And if you hear them mention Devil's Gulch or Kane or the livestock shipment, you tell me everything." Billy, though nervous, nodded. "Yes, ma'am, I'll do my best." Eleanor, draped in the shadows of the room, a blind woman orchestrating a dangerous game of deception, waited for Billy's return, the serpent's coil of her brother's treachery tightening around her. Billy returned with critical news. Silas and Jebediah were planning a deadly ambush at Devil's Gulch, using a livestock shipment as a ruse. Their hired gun, Kane, and his men were already there, waiting to finish what your brothers started. Sheriff Brody, a reluctant accomplice, would be nearby to ensure their escape. Eleanor, fueled by a cold resolve, knew she had to turn their trap against them. "They expect the prey," she told Jedediah, "but they'll find the hunter." The three of them, Eleanor, Jedediah, and Billy, left Harmony Creek under the cover of night, navigating the treacherous terrain to reach Devil's Gulch first. Jedediah, with his rifle, would be Eleanor's eyes, and Billy would be their intelligence. As they neared the gulch, they heard the low voices of men. "They're here," Jedediah whispered. Eleanor, knowing they were outnumbered, began to sing a haunting lullaby, her voice echoing through the canyon. It was a deliberate lure, a promise of her arrival. Silas and Jebediah, along with Cain, heard the song. Cain grunted, "She's ours." They watched as the blind woman, guided only by sound, walked directly into their trap. The stage was set. As Eleanor walked into the heart of Devil's Gulch, Silas stepped from the shadows. "Come to surrender, little sister," he sneered. Jebediah emerged, his face grim. "You should have stayed buried." The hired guns fanned out, their movements a deliberate threat. Just as Cain reached for his gun, a shot from Jedediah's rifle struck the ground near his feet. Chaos erupted. Disoriented by the sudden attack, Cain's men fired wildly. Eleanor, moving with surprising speed, dropped to the ground, using her hands to navigate the terrain. She heard her brother's panicked shouts. "Billy!" she called out. "The horses!" Billy, at a prearranged signal, let out a series of whistles, spooking the horses and causing a stampede that added to the pandemonium. Amidst the chaos, Eleanor closed in on her brothers. She found Silas fumbling with his pistol and with a heavy rock smashed his wrist. He cried out in pain, dropping the gun. When Jebediah lunged at her, Jedediah fired, hitting his shoulder and sending him sprawling. Within minutes, the fight was over. Cain and his men were disarmed, and the Vance brothers were beaten. Sheriff Brody arrived, finding Eleanor standing tall, her blind eyes fixed on her defeated tormentors. The sound of justice had finally echoed through the gulch. Sheriff Brody, faced with the evidence, was in a difficult position. Silas and Jebediah immediately blamed Eleanor, calling her delusional. "Sheriff," Eleanor said, her voice steady, "my brothers buried me alive. Billy here can tell you how they've been selling off my father's things to pay their debts." Billy, though nervous, confirmed everything he had overheard in Harmony Creek. He spoke of the brothers' debts and their plan to use the livestock shipment to get Eleanor killed. Jedediah backed up the story, stating that he had found Eleanor in a shallow grave. Brody, seeing the fear on the brothers' faces and the undeniable strength of Eleanor's testimony, knew the truth. Their carefully constructed lies had unraveled. He sighed in defeat. "All right, I'll take you all back to Harmony Creek. We'll sort this out." As they left Devil's Gulch, Eleanor felt a mix of weariness and relief. Justice, she realized, was not just about vengeance, but about uncovering the truth. Back in Harmony Creek, Silas and Jebediah were formally arrested and charged with attempted murder and fraud. Cain and his men were also implicated. With her brothers in jail, Eleanor faced a new challenge, managing the heavily indebted Vance Ranch. During this time, her bond with Jedediah deepened. He became her eyes, her confidant, and her partner. He read to her from books and newspapers, describing the world she couldn't see. One evening she confessed, "I never imagined finding this trust." Jedediah took her hand, his touch a calloused but warm anchor. "You saved yourself, Eleanor," he said. "I'm just glad I was there." Eleanor realized that her vengeance was not about inflicting pain, but about restoring what had been stolen, her father's legacy and her life. With Jedediah's help, she began to untangle her brother's web of deceit. In the quiet of Harmony Creek, Eleanor Vance was not just surviving, she was learning to live again, finding a new kind of light in the darkness. With Jedediah's unwavering support and Billy's crucial testimony, Eleanor proved her brother's guilt. They were convicted, and Eleanor, despite her blindness, was appointed overseer of her father's ranch. She and Jedediah returned to the ranch, a bittersweet homecoming. Jedediah described the sprawling house and vast fields, and Eleanor felt a familiar sense of home. The ranch hands, relieved to be free of Silas and Jebediah's rule, welcomed her. "We'll rebuild, Eleanor," Jedediah assured her. She couldn't see the land, but she could feel its potential. Her blindness had not diminished her spirit, it had refined it. Her relationship with Jedediah blossomed into a deep and enduring love. He was her guide, her partner, and her heart. The story of Eleanor Vance became a legend in the territory, a testament to resilience, redemption, and the power of the human spirit. With Jedediah by her side, Eleanor transformed the Vance Ranch into a beacon of prosperity. The darkness that had been forced upon her had not defined her. It had forged her. And on that ranch, under the vast sky of the American West, she found her own dawn.